Hello and welcome back to Insights, produced by TVC 22. I'm your host, Bruce Cruz. Today we're speaking with Lisa Deacon, a member of the United Counties of Prescott-Russell Coalition for Climate Action. Now, the group is dedicated to fighting climate change in the local area. Lisa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you for coming on to the show. Yeah. So, before we get into it, the term climate change has been tossed around for as long as I can remember. Could you provide us with a clear definition on what that is for those who don't know?
Yeah, so for a lot of people, their first exposure to the topic of climate change may have been Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth documentary way back in the day. And back then, it was actually referred to mostly as global warming. That term has changed in recent years because we know that it's not so much just global warming that's happening. It's so a lot of people think that the impacts of climate change are only warming related, for example. So they changed it to use the term climate change, which encompasses that broader scientifically observed phenomenon that's happening around the world, where our climate is shifting all around the world. Basically, the scientists have said that there's no region that's untouched. Some places are getting more extreme weather events. Some places are getting extreme melt in our polar regions. North in the Arctic and south in Antarctica are seeing unprecedented melting. But there are also places like Texas, right, that had last year a really intense hail and snowstorm. And so climate change is really us as humans understanding our land and our regions where we are, and creating the lives that we've created on this in these places, largely based by weather patterns and the fact that those weather patterns are becoming less and less predictable. There's also the potential for sea level change as well. That's sort of one of the impacts of climate change. So, not necessarily as weather related, but will have a huge impact on how humans survive and thrive in the places where they're at right now. I hope that gives a good, so I can explain a little bit about greenhouse gases, but just that
Yeah.
term climate change, it's not so much just global warming, is what I'd like to say.
Right. And just kind of going off of that, climate change, is it a man-made thing that sometimes happens, or is it also, can it be naturally occurring as well in nature?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that climate change is not only man made, but we do know that the type of climate change that we're experiencing now is way, way, way more rapid. And that the more rapid change that we're seeing is related to and caused by human activity on Earth. So while you would have, the ice age, you would have different shifts that happen that, especially around here in Ontario, we think a lot about how the Great Lakes were formed. That was during a period of climate change, certainly. But we know that unfortunately, the climate change is happening now, that is impacting us so much, is due to human activity. So we have the ability to change that, to actually stop it and reverse most of what's happening over the next centuries or millennia. So yeah, it's not always, climate change is naturally occurring over thousands and tens of thousands of years. What we've seen in just the last 200 years is what's really alarming, and really has been proven by scientists around the world to be human activity related.
And you had mentioned something about greenhouse gases.
Yeah, so you'll hear people who talk about climate change, who are passionate activists or government or scientists. They'll use the term GHG, means greenhouse gas. Essentially, greenhouse gases are what are causing that human-related climate change today. So the phenomena is that gas in our atmosphere, because we have our Earth, and then we have our atmosphere, and we have ozone, and then we have outer space. We have the more concentrated gases that we have in our atmosphere, the more the heat from the sun hits that atmosphere, and the heat gets trapped with those gases. So people usually think about carbon. It's measurable, and a lot of people talk about carbon footprint. And carbon is essentially how much material, organic matter from Earth that we're putting. Maybe it's in the form of gasoline, maybe it's in the form of methane, and it's going up into our atmosphere and creating this sort of trapping scenario, where again the solar heat comes through, and that is what's causing our Earth's surface temperature to rise. And we're trying to keep it below the 1.5, 2 degree range of change, because our Earth is really that fragile, where 2 degrees could be the make or break point for our ability to survive on the planet.
Perfect. Lisa, now that I've got all the details hammered out with all the definitions, thank you for that, for those explanations. I just want to kind of divulge into what the United Counties of Prescott-Russell Climate Action Coalition has been doing. So I know that earlier this month, your group had sent out a press release to all the local municipalities asking that they create a regional climate action plan. Yes, and
Yeah,
what does that mean?
so a climate action plan is something that is being done at the municipal level across Canada and around the world. In Canada, there are over 400 municipalities, coast to coast to coast, doing climate action planning. Essentially, over 50% of our ability as Canadians to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and live more sustainably lies in the jurisdiction of municipalities. So it's the local decisions that we make as communities into what we do with our garbage, what we do with our recycling, whether or not we have public transit. Those types of decisions impact in a really big way how Canada overall is able to reduce our emissions as a country, and also show leadership around the world to some of those larger emitters. People often talk about China, about the United States, some of these biggest emitters in the world. If we're leading and showing them how it's done hyper locally, that not only sets us up better for our sustainability as communities and future generations, but it also shows to other countries and also other jurisdictions what can be done, and how communities can really come together against this big existential crises that we're facing as a species. So we asked our coalition, we're 10 members, and we represent just individuals who are concerned about climate change. A lot of us lose sleep at night due to climate change, but we're trying to do something about it. We also represent different environmental organizations across the region of United Counties of Prescott and Russell. So I have the privilege of serving as president of Eco East, which is mainly based in the West End, around Russell, the Nation, Clarence Rockland area. So we're this wonderful little coalition that got together online thanks to the pandemic, or no thanks to the pandemic. We just started having virtual conversations about what we could do as a group. And this idea of a climate action plan just seemed so possible and such a great moment for our counties to undertake. Like I said, over 400 municipalities in Canada have already got a climate action plan in place and are measuring their goals. And so that covers over 70% of Canadians. And we want to be in that percentage of Canadians that have a local climate action plan. It is guided by international standards and protocols that is managed through a program by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and another organization called ICLEI. So they run a very standardized, very seamless, step-by-step approach with 5 different milestones that municipalities can work through in their planning, implementation, and evaluation and monitoring phases. So it seems like a lot of the work has been done for us in a lot of ways. They're really trying to make it easy for elected representatives and staff of municipalities who are obviously very tight on time and juggling a lot of priorities. They want to make it easy for these people to be courageous in climate action and to represent their community's future well-being. So yeah, we came together and put together a briefing note and a presentation. And we've been doing delegations and presentations to municipalities on that lower tier, so the local township and city and municipality level, to encourage them to urge the United Counties at the higher level of the municipality to undertake climate action planning together.
Perfect. And just going back to what you're talking about, I feel like we went a little too quickly when talking about the 5 steps you were mentioning. So what do those look like when trying to create a climate action plan?
Sure. So I personally am a project manager. So this is what I love about the program is that it's so step by step. So the climate action plan, it's called Partners for Climate Protection, is the FCM program that we are urging the counties to join. The 5 steps, so there are 5 different milestones. It starts with doing an emissions inventory. So at the corporate level for the United Counties, so their buildings, their staff, their meetings, their vehicles, road maintenance, everything like that, what sorts of emissions are being generated from those activities on a corporate level? And then you go to understanding that inventory, you move into setting a reductions target. So we know that we emit 3 tons, 6 tons, 100 tons, whatever, of carbon per year as the United Counties of Prescott and Russell. What could we reduce? What could we scale back? Where could we save funds? Where could we use different sorts of energy sources for what we're doing, or change our activities altogether in a way that improve our outcomes? So it's setting targets is the second milestone. The third milestone is generating a plan around how to actually meet those reductions targets that the corporation sets. The fourth one is implementing the plan that's developed. And the 5th stage is evaluation and monitoring. So how is it going? Are we meeting our goals? And I just want to mention too that there's kind of 2 sides to all of these climate action plans. There's the corporate one as well as the community one. So the 5 steps that I just walked you through, I did that with the United Counties of Prescott and Russell as a corporation, as an example. Their meetings, their buildings, do they leave the lights on at night? In town hall, for example. And then on the other side of that, you have the community process, which is those same 5 steps, but is led by community through rigorous consultation, town hall meetings, bringing in the voices of all of the different sectors that formulate our local economies. And so asking, what can we as neighbors do? What can we do in our schools? What can we do in businesses and other types of organizations, all as a community, to also reduce our emissions? So it's really neat because it's holding accountable sort of the United Counties and our local governments, but then it's also turning to the flip side and make it into a bit of like a fun community challenge. What can we do? Can we have a bike to work day here in the counties? Can we pledge to turn our lights off more often, or only do, anyways, there's all sorts of ideas there. I don't want to get into the ideas too much. But I love the process because it's really meant to be designing a plan that makes sense for our region. And it's entirely up to us to decide what goes in that plan. So if there are things that we feel are really achievable here locally, there's a lot of opportunities being in kind of a rural area, that there are some really neat climate solutions that we could be putting into play out here that are good for our economy. And then, what doesn't work for us? We're not a hyper urban downtown core. What doesn't make sense for us to have out here as a climate solution? So it's kind of cool that it's really up to us what makes sense.
Perfect. And just going off of that, Lisa, what do you think are the biggest sources of emission in rural areas, like you said, in United Counties of Prescott-Russell?
That's a great question. When they talk about community emissions across the board in rural areas, one of the biggest reductions that we can make is actually organics. And when I say organics, I mean organic waste. So in rural areas, it's still very uncommon that we have a composting and an organics waste pickup program. If you are in local, if you're in Ottawa more locally or other cities, you tend to have a curbside organic waste pickup on a weekly or biweekly basis. In rural areas, we don't tend to have that organic waste pickup. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of the small towns, they could really use it. Personally, I live outside in the country, so I do my own composting. But just to give you a picture, like that is the across the board for rural areas in Canada, that's actually one of the largest sources of emissions, is that when you eat a banana and you choose to throw it in the garbage, or when you don't have the choice to not throw it in the garbage for whatever reason, you end up sending that into the landfill where it sinks down, and it's the way that it is processed in landfill, the way that it's deteriorates in landfill, produces one of the most harmful greenhouse gases, which is methane. So that has been proven as across the board, no matter what rural area you're in Canada, that's one of the worst sources of emissions. And it seems like we should be able to figure this out because we do have so much space out here. If you're in one of the small towns, you may not have space in your backyard to do your own composting. But I love the opportunity for this as a climate solution in a rural area, because if we managed our organic waste better, we also have the opportunity to improve soil quality with our organic waste. So I grow a lot of my own food. I'm very, very lucky to have a property where I can do that. I compost in my backyard. That compost goes onto my soil, full of microorganisms that feed the plants that I'm growing and feed my family. So we have this really awesome opportunity in a more rural, spacious region to be doing interesting things with our organic waste rather than putting them into landfill. But it is also a complicated challenge. But it is one that many different regions are starting to take up. So that's just one example of something. But again, with a climate action plan, it isn't just what Lisa thinks should be done. And I don't, like, nobody in our coalition has all of the answers and is saying this is what the plan should include. We're simply asking for a plan that makes sense. Yeah.
Perfect. And just going off of that, we have touched a lot on the climate action plan. What are some of the other things that your group is trying to do to promote awareness?
So the coalition, we really formed in March, so not too long ago. We've been meeting on a weekly basis. We've gotten to know each other. We've connected. It's been really, really wonderful to find like-minded people. And we represent all sorts of people. There are some people who are retired. Some of us are working parents. Some of us are farmers. And we get together and we discuss these issues, and we find so I just want to really shed light on how wonderful it is to be having this regional conversation and finding each other and being able to come together. Eco East, which is the organization that I serve locally here, we're a nonprofit based out of Russell. We've been around for over 10 years legally as the Citizens Environmental Stewardship Association east of Ottawa. We rebranded about a year ago to Eco East just to kind of encapsulate that we're a sustainability related organization that touches on many different environmental issues. We have several active working groups touching on habitat conservation and regeneration. Another one is focused on water. The Climate Action and Energy Working Group is the group that actually started and reached out and engaged with the coalition. Lynn Ovenden has done really great work leading that. We also have a waste reduction working group, which is quite active as well. That's just helping people to not go zero waste, because that's really, really difficult this day and age, but look at ways to reduce waste. We celebrate local businesses that reduce their waste as well, and take steps. And we really try to increase that awareness through celebration. We've done a lot of tree planting this year. We planted about 700 trees on local properties. We've also, like I said, played a big role in getting the Coalition for Climate Action started up. And yeah, those are just some of the activities that we're up to. We run social media, and we like to share information on what's happening locally. We're also very tapped into other campaigns that are happening locally around issues like deforestation, or bringing in heavy industry that are climate polluters. So we're trying to play our role here in the western area of the region, and what our concerns are out here related to the environment, but also be in solidarity with things that are happening in other areas like Alfred Plantagenet and L'Orignal, and other areas.
Perfect. Now, let's just hypothesize for a second there, Lisa. Let's say after all this work that you and the group has done, you've put in so much effort, what happens if the municipalities say no to a climate action plan? What if the community doesn't want one?
Yeah, and that's always a possibility for many, many reasons. We feel like there is really not a good reason to say no to climate action planning at this point. I mean, it's very, very few people that deny that climate change is happening, and that it's impacting people, and that it will make it more difficult for our children and our grandchildren to survive and thrive here. But it is always a possibility for many reasons that the climate action plan push that we're urging for could fall through. I'll just say to date, we've presented to 4 councils and municipal committees, and we've received very positive feedback from most of those councils and committees. We're looking forward to doing more presentations in the remaining townships. I think the Clarence Rockland one is actually now being scheduled for September. So our delegate in Clarence Rockland is just preparing for that presentation to Clarence Rockland Council. If it falls through, there are a lot of things that we can do as residents of this region. We can continue to push at our local level. So at our local townships, at our local cities, at our local municipalities, and urge sort of a lower tier climate action planning. That's really not efficient or effective as much as doing it at the county's level. And so that is really why we're urging for it to be a county-wide approach, because having one climate action plan is much better than having 8 climate action plans. And the energy to go into 8 is certainly less efficient. But you know, there's always talk when you're in activism, you know, that there are a lot of different levers to pull, and we do know that there will be municipal elections as well next fall. So this was always in the plan for Eco East, is getting to know who our elected representatives are and where they stand on environmental issues and sustainability issues. And so I think that would likely be our longer term view. Probably regardless of the action plan or not, we want to be involved in the action plan and lend our help. But if it were to fall through or not, we also want to bring awareness to our neighbors and local residents around who is on the ballot to be running for local councils and where are their interests. Are they with sort of that sustainability in mind? And if not, what are some of their challenges as candidates? Maybe there's a bit of awareness building there to do with the candidates themselves as well, around what are their challenges to having that courage to look at sustainable solutions for our region.
Perfect. And last question, Lisa, just to really hit it home. Ultimately, where does fighting climate change start?
That's the big question. This is an analogy that I use. let's say that you go to McDonald's tomorrow and you get a Big Mac with fries, extra large Coke, you go through the drive-through, you get a plastic straw in your cup. I think that in our culture, there is a big message telling the person that does that, which is me on occasion, that you should feel guilty and ashamed of that, and that you can't be demanding climate action if you're eating the Big Mac. And so I use that analogy a lot because I would rather, I hope that people get their Big Mac and then they take their other hand, their free hand, to write an email to their local elected representative, and or handwritten if you're more into writing, or pick up the phone. You still have one hand, so you could pick up the phone and ask your elected representative to do something about climate change. Just don't make it a fancy message. Just say, I'm concerned about climate change. I really, really want you to make this a priority in your mandate. We know that 60% of the action that has to happen is to slow and stop climate change is falls on our public institutions. So we know that 50% of the action that we can take is with municipalities at the provincial level, at the federal level. There are huge changes that can be made as well. So in that 60-40 percentage, where people feel guilty for having a plastic straw or whatever, I drove my car when I could have walked or something. Yeah, you might want to make those little changes if you can, if those are possible for you, if you're not too stressed out to them, if you're not already juggling 50 million priorities in your own life. But the one action that people can take, and it's free, all it takes is 5 minutes of your time, is to write to a locally elected representative. So I'm going to say, Bruce, to answer your question, it does fall on us as individuals in a democracy, but it's not only on us. It falls on us just to tell our elected representatives and to vote for people who are going to take courageous action against climate change. And so it's not the straws is what I want to say. And that's a big misperception. So I want people to leave that shame behind and just take 5 minutes and write a quick email or letter or make a call.
Perfect, Lisa. I want to thank you again for coming onto our show, for having this lovely discussion, which was so helpful for all of us, really.
Thanks so much, Bruce, for helping us to tell the story of our work and for all that you do. It's really lovely to be here.
Of course. Thank you again. For TBC 22, I'm Bruce Cruz.